Well, last week marked 6 months since the deadly wildfires on Maui, and the community is continuing to heal while the county continues to face a number of issues.
That's right. And today in studio, Maui Mayor Richard Bissen is with us to take our questions and yours live. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And thanks for tuning in here on this Tuesday as we talk about Maui and focus our attention and spotlighting some of the issues that are still going on there on the island. We want to encourage those of you who are tuning in to engage in the conversation. One of the unique things about this show is that we like to go through some of the questions and comments and thoughts that you have yourself. So you can always enter them online by heading over to our Facebook page on Hawaii News Now and enter your comments there, or you can scan the QR code that you see at the bottom of your screen for your questions for the Mayor of Maui.
And joining us live in studio is Maui Mayor Richard Bissen. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for being here.
Aloha. Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate you coming, especially, given that we've just marked six months since the fires, and just within the hour we got word the 101st victim identified, a 76-year-old man. When you reflect back on the last 6 months, sort of tell us your thoughts.
Well, first of all, with regard to that family member, I want to extend our condolences and sympathies to his family. I'm sure they're relieved that there's some closure. I know he was found in unusual circumstance, according to the police, but I'm glad that we haven't given up our search for the rest of the folks that are still on our missing list. And so for that, I'm hoping that brings some closure to the family.
Want to ask, one of the biggest issues that you continue to tackle is housing and finding enough housing for those who have been displaced because of the fire. We've heard from the governor, who was on this program last week, talking about maybe his not needing to use and exercise the emergency proclamation in order to get some of these short-term vacation rentals into the hands of those who need housing. I wanted to get your thoughts right now on where things stand for the some 500 families that are still looking for some permanent housing, sure, and your overall thoughts about how that process is going.
Of course. So, we introduced to the council Bill 31, which was passed unanimously, that allowed us to provide tax incentives for those who converted. Of course, we didn't know at that time how successful that would be. Since then, I can report today, there's been 1,560 conversions from short-term to long-term rentals. And we know that because you have to go through our real property tax folks in order to apply for that. 66% of those are Lahaina or West Maui properties. Our Maui people, our Lahaina people, they want to remain there as much as possible. But, we know that if we can't find all the units there, we'll offer them, units in other places. Also, there's, a $500 million program that was put together with the governor and with several other partners, including the county. And our goal was to get interim housing so we can get people out of hotels and into something more stable for at least 18 months, 2 years, perhaps longer. And so that's something the county is actively working on with our partners. Again, the goal is to get people from a hotel situation to something more stable. And there are a lot of people working on that plan right now.
And even as you start to plan that stability plan, one of the things the governor talked about was this idea of a housing cliff, that in 18 months to 2 years from now, we're going to have all these folks when these programs run out. Are we going to have the housing to then put them in? One of the solutions, of course, could be some of the short-term rental conversions. We'll get to that in a moment. But what are your concerns about these programs running out, these funds running out, and where all these folks go? 2 years is not that far away.
Yeah, one of our duties as the administration is to find those resources, to find those partners, find those experts that exist to help us through this. And one of those has been FEMA. Now, FEMA, I think people will tell you some of the rents that they're paying are causing some artificial, rates on the west side. Of course, we all see that, and that's part of that cliff discussion you just asked about. But what we're also urging them to do is to build 1,000 modular units for us. And the hope is to get people from those vacation rentals that are FEMA eligible into those modular units so that we can have those units go to folks that are not eligible, not FEMA eligible. And we have a whole plan to address that part of our community. So for FEMA to help us build, and we have to identify places and infrastructure and water and those locations which we're trying to identify, which we have identified on the west side, is to get FEMA in there to build these units. We also have CNHA, one of our big partners. They've had very successful, they've been successful with our host family program, with the accessory dwelling unit assistance program. And so they've been helping us. They have some modular homes that are on their way right now, and that should lead to 34 of those units being built in Kahului, in the location where we had the press conference when we announced that partnership. So I think through our different partners, we are trying to expand the inventory, and that's really the key. And we're trying to focus on West Maui, but unfortunately, not all the units will be able to be built there.
And how was the decision made for those residents who are eventually moving into these longer term housing? Let's say there's a family that wants to stay within West Maui in the Lahaina community. We know that there are limitations to how many of those are available. Rather than having to put them on another part of the island, how do you determine and place the families based on where this housing is made available?
So those, again, go through FEMA and HAIMA. Those are some of the decision makers. What they do is they have a checklist. Do their children go to school in Lahaina? Do they work in Lahaina? Do they have medical care in Lahaina? So there are some priorities that they've looked at. In some cases, they're not able to accommodate, and they offer locations throughout the island. And I think FEMA's standard is if it's within 40 miles of their original home, that's valid. That's a valid offer of housing. And I know some people have turned them down, and some of the frustration is we don't have enough units. But under FEMA's standard, if you do turn it down, you become ineligible to remain at the hotel. So while you don't have to accept a home in Central Maui, you cannot stay at the hotel anymore because they have found you an alternative, a solution, they call it. Now, the good news, and I really want people to understand this, is you can appeal FEMA's decision. And they, in fact, you know, the administrator, Deanne Criswell, was here last week on Maui, and we had a couple of meetings, and she was very emphatic about that. You can appeal that decision and explain your unique situation and why you need to remain in the hotel because you're not accepting Haiku or Makawa or somewhere else. And again, I think that's encouraging, and I'm not sure how successful that has been for folks yet, but people who do get turned down should state their case.
I'm interested to know what you think about the short-term rentals sort of in the broader picture, because the governor was on here and he said, 31,000 of these units on Maui, the vast majority of them operating illegally. Sure. He's really calling on the counties to do better enforcement for one, and then on the legislature perhaps to pass some legislation that would make it more difficult overall. But what are your thoughts about the proliferation of this and, if a crackdown is possible?
Well, first of all, I agree with what the governor said, that, we can improve and increase our enforcement on all the counties. I'll just speak for Maui, though. This disaster has really shined a bright light on why this is such an issue. I think people felt it sort of in the past, like, yeah, I guess it's not a good thing, but it didn't really affect anybody as directly as it does right now. And so, of course, we think there are too many illegal rentals. And I'll just address that population, that group. They don't pay their share of taxes. They use up the resources that are meant for everyone. And they increase the density in neighborhoods that were not intended for these. So those are just the obvious ones. But on top of that now is short-term rentals take away from long-term rental need. We have more short-term rentals than we need. We don't have enough long-term rentals. So obviously we should convert them. Having the moratorium is quite a discussion. I know the governor's talked about it. He's been very clear about what will happen. Now, we did get 1,560 conversions. And there's another batch we expect by the end of March. Because if you applied and were approved by January 31st, you got 18 months of tax relief. If you do it by the end of March, you get 12 months of tax relief. Still a good incentive. And then FEMA apparently has already found the number of units they needed to house FEMA eligible folks. So, as far as a moratorium, there are some legal hurdles and some issues that go with doing that. Because the first obvious question is, okay, so you tell someone they can't use it for short term, so you don't collect any more legal taxes from the legal folks. So all that gets wiped out. Now you got long term. How do you force them to become long term? And then how do you force them to rent it to someone? They can choose, because the governor's moratorium can last for 90 days up to the time of his proclamation, which he can extend. So the question is, would a short-term person who's told they can't use it, would they wait out the 90 days, or would they start renting out to a long-term person? I'm not sure what they would do. Or would they sell it, which is, of course, a good thing if they sold it to a long-term resident. I think this is a discussion that has to happen statewide, at least on Maui County, but probably statewide, to talk about what solutions we had. The solution we offered, the tax relief, was to incentivize people to do it voluntarily, somewhat voluntarily. Now, what we intend to do, just so you know, the other folks that have not joined or not opted in, we're going to increase their taxes. Nobody wants to hear that, but we're going to increase their taxes to make up for the loss of revenue for the folks we gave them a tax break. So if it's a $20 million shortfall that the county experiences, we're going to tax $20 million from the folks. And basically if you join in, that means you can afford to do it. If you can't join in, then you can afford to pay the tax.
So this is just, go ahead.
Oh, so no, I'm just curious, do you have a projected number for how much taxes are going to have to increase? What is the projected shortfall? Is it $20 million or is it more?
Those are numbers that finance put out maybe back in November, December. It could be. But now that we have 1,560 folks that opted in, we need to break down what category they came from. Because if they were short-term rental, were they timeshare, or were they non-owner occupied dwellings? Because they each get taxed at a different rate. So if they all fall into one bucket, so there was $5, $8, and $11 approximately the tax rates. So if they all come from the $11 bucket, we'll multiply that times the $1,560. But if 20% came from the $5, and so we had to figure that part out, and that's why we couldn't project this to the county until after we saw who converted. So now we actually have a real number, and we can say we are losing X amount of revenue. Now the question is, how do we divide that up among, the legal short-term? If I was a legal short-term rental owner, I would be very upset at the illegals, because I'm paying all those taxes and you're not, and you're getting the same amount of income that I'm getting, not having to pay taxes.
Yeah, well, definitely. This is going to be a process and something that we'll have to track throughout this legislative session, as we know that this continues to be an issue and something that the governor has spoken about. When you're looking at this overall catastrophe and this recovery effort that happens, you almost have to look at it as phases. And right now you guys are focusing on just getting people into more of these permanent housing. But the conversation is also beginning about the rebuilding effort for those who want to get back to their lands, to their areas where their house maybe had some damage, but still able to be able to rebuild and look at that future. As you're talking about sort of the rebuilding portion, there's a lot of the infrastructure that needs to also be upgraded and also just maintained and fixed. What can you tell us about that process as those residents who are looking to begin the building process? What else needs to happen in terms of the infrastructure for you to even get to that point?
It's a very timely question. So we're very fortunate that EPA is on the ground. They've been with us since last week, Monday, doing an assessment of our wastewater and our water systems. What that means is running cameras through some of the pipes. And I was told there's over 9,000 linear feet of pipes that they got to go through. I should have remembered the exact number, but you can know it's a long ways. It's 5 square miles of impact zone. So what they're helping us with is determine how much damage there's been. Do we have to restore, rebuild, repair? What exactly has to happen on the infrastructure? Because you're right, no one gets to rebuild until we know what the infrastructure needs are. So the reason I mentioned EPA is we have a neighborhood, Wahikuli, which is vast. They were very devastated by this. Most of them are on cesspool. Everybody has to convert to septic by 2050. if you get a brand new building permit on Maui now, you have to be in septic or county. You cannot go to a cesspool. So if you're somebody who's just gone through this trauma and now you have to rebuild, you got to put in a septic, which is going to add a big number to you, at least 50,000, but some are quoting higher than that. And then the county switches over to a sewer system. Now what do you do? So what we're trying to do is work with our neighborhoods, talk to them about maybe staying on the sewer system for now if you rebuild. But we're asking the EPA to help us rebuild and connect that neighborhood to the sewer system, because we know that's something that's been wanted for years. But that's a big number, financially. And so to get EPA to help us would be really a huge win. And of course, there's a lot of blue rock, so that's going to add to it. But we think that we're getting closer to that solution. They can also help us review our water lines and how our water is going. So if we can get infrastructure up and running, that is the key to getting the rebuild. The second part of that is the debris cleanup. So we're at least 100 lots as of this morning, and there's more. And that's a pretty good clip in less than a month. We think we are going to increase the number of crews. So at one point, we started with one crew, and then it got to 3 and 5 and 10 and 15. I know we've had at least 15 out there now. We want to get to 25 or 30 crews working simultaneously, 10-hour shifts, 7 days a week. So far, and this isn't to say it'll continue, but we've been ahead of schedule on each of the phases that we've predicted. So for example, the 26 homes cleared up in Kula, that finished ahead of schedule. Phase 1 was ahead of schedule. Some of the different, search and rescue went quicker than we thought. And that's because they've devoted more crews to, the effort. So if we can get our debris cleaned up and moved at least to the temporary site, and then have a permanent site identified and move it there, we can get people back to their homes quicker.
Well, and that's a great segue to the next question, which is where that should ultimately go. There are so many discussions, there seems to be consensus that we are going to keep the debris on island. The question is ultimately where. What are your thoughts about where that site should be and also what that time frame looks like?
Yeah, again, great question, obviously timely as well. When we were looking at places, talking to the experts, the EPA folks and Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA and all the folks who were on island, we were trying to identify where could that debris go. Of course, we considered off island. FEMA would not pay for that to go off island. It would cost in the billions of dollars, and that would be on the county's shoulder to do that. It would also be risky driving or having to put a temporary site near the harbor so they could go onto a freighter and be moved across ocean. All sorts of ideas have come to people, have put out there Kaho'olawe and a place that's already been devastated that has not ever been considered by the county as a potential. But we had 8 sites for the long term. Now the temporary one, I just want to distinguish the temporary disposal site in Olowalu was decided based on many factors. We could not have started the first cleanup on Maui, on Lahaina, if we did not have that temporary site. And that site was ideal because of its location and its topography. Some of you may know at one time that was a landfill. For about 30 years, that was our landfill out there. So there were a lot of things in place that made that, possibly a place we could utilize. So that was made, that was a quick decision made so that it could it was urgent. This next step, the next phase, there were 8 locations identified. They've been narrowed down to 3. Everyone has until February 16th, 15th or 16th, I think is the date to respond to a survey, island-wide, because this will impact everyone. So a couple of sites are still in Lahaina because of their proximity and what they were previously. One of them is owned by HHFTC, the other by DLNR. So we'd have to negotiate land acquisition. And the other is owned by the county, our Central Maui landfill, which is a farther way away, but it's a place already being used. And a lot of that will have to be what the sentiment of the community is, because early on, the sentiment we got from Lahaina was to keep the debris in that area because of the loss of life. There seems to be other alternatives that people are offering to still honor life, but be able to put that debris somewhere other than Lahaina. So there are a lot of factors. It's very clear, all the criteria. It's on our MauiRecovers.org website, and people can look at it in real time and see what's happening. But we are going to fully vet this, and February 21st, we'll have a community meeting back in Lahaina and talk about it.
We'll continue to track that. When we look at, speaking of tracking, there's a number of bills that have been introduced this legislative session that are dealing with a variety of possible solutions to assist in the recovery efforts. There have been bills introduced to set up a legalized gaming or online sports betting gaming that would go to Lahaina funds. A lot of these were just proposals that ultimately won't get past even a first hearing. But one particular bill that's moving through the Senate is SB 3381, which addresses an opportunity to form an advisory council that would fall under the umbrella of the HCDA. Wanted to get your just general thoughts on where the county stands on this, because it sounds like this advisory board would have a lot of power and say over the rebuilding efforts and what the future of this community looks like. From a county standpoint, what do you think about this proposal?
Yeah, thanks for that. We neither supported nor opposed the bill. We did put in comments because, you can see that there are benefits. And I know every bill that has been put before the legislature, I have to say the ones that I'm familiar with, were well-intentioned. I mean, they really are. And they're there to try to help our folks. On this particular bill, I think the real key is who will be the makeup of the board, who will decide that in its final version. Because I think one of the things everyone who has spoken publicly about this, from the President of the United States and the governor and myself and others, is how we want this to be locally led and government supported. And so if we want Lahaina to determine their own fate, then pretty much that board needs to be at least Maui people, at the very least, I would think. I have an advisory team, a very small team. They're all Lahaina folks. They give me immediate, feedback. They give me very direct feedback, very frank and unfiltered many times, which is helpful to me, because just when you think you know something, you get told what you didn't know. So I think the idea of it, is I'm sure to help the economy and to help the rebuild and the long-term impacts. But I think the key to that's going to be who's on that board and who decides who's on that board.
And I think, the thinking, and not to presume, but the idea would be that it would streamline things, and a lot of people are really concerned that this is going to take a long time, given the history. When you look at Maui and the zoning codes, and just how, by some critics say that they're very archaic, and they're concerned that this could get bogged down in bureaucracy. Do you think that this kind of a strategy would help or hinder the progress? I mean, because what I'm hearing from you is, look, I already have an advisory team. We already have county structures to kind of do all of this. We don't necessarily need this added oversight.
Yeah, I think when you say the word oversight, you've just added a layer, right? I mean, so if the idea is to get more efficient, maybe we don't need more layers. But if we are going to do the layers, just make sure that the people on there are able to speak to the community and what's going on in the community. You can't really have a conversation about Maui without talking about our zoning and our permitting. Obviously, that's something we're working on right now. We have a new director of planning, Kate Blystone, who was confirmed by the council. And she comes to us from the Hawaii Community Foundation's House Maui initiative that she had a very strong hand in. So I think she's going to help us. Right now, they are reviewing the entire code right now as we're speaking, and they're hoping to send that to the commission soon to take a look at. So I know we are listening to the criticisms that have been levied towards Maui for years, not just the last 6 months or the last 12 months. So I hope we are taking the right steps, the right action to try to be responsive, mostly to our own community. I mean, the critics are fair too, but I think our own community, those who want to build smartly and want to do it in the right way, should be given that opportunity. If our zoning codes are archaic, then let's revisit them, and let's ask for help from the council to see if we can make it more efficient.
I want to just get your general thoughts about the community engagement, because that was one piece, in the days after, there was obviously a lot of tension, a lot of frustration by residents who were speaking out at community events. How are things 6 months now? What is the pulse like now with the community in terms of what you're hearing from residents when you go to these community meetings? How often are members of your administration out there speaking to residents, and how do you think the overall dialogue is and the temperature of those residents who are relying on the government for support?
So my good friend Sam Ka'ai Elemakule from Maui, he likes to say Hawaiians vote with their feet. So I say that to you because the Unity Rally on Maui on January 21st had a lot of sets of feet that came out that day. So I think that answers the question more than I could. And it's not a anecdotal, or it's not an assumption. Anyone there could see and could feel the energy, the positive energy, whatever side. I was telling people that I talked to that day, today's not the day for us to resolve our differences. Today is the day for us to set them aside and to show that we can be a community. And a lot of people from different views showed up and came to that event. So I think that was about as good a measurement of where the community is today than I could say to you. And again, I'm sure it was covered by your news agencies and a lot of the others. And I think most people can tell for themselves what that looked like to them. But people came from all over the island, all over the state, some people from outside of the state, just to take part, to show support. And if you saw, it was on not just the land, on the water. Because what you saw on the land were all those people. What you didn't see were all the canoe that came from the different islands, and the protocol and the respect that they demonstrated. I thought it was very telling. And I thought it was. I think it resonates still today in the community. I know it does with me. And I was just a walker in that. I wasn't the planner. I wasn't not taking any credit for any of it. We were a co-sponsor as a county, but personally, my wife and I just wanted to walk among folks and see old friends and make new friends. But I really think that's the best indicator of where the community is, at least on January 21st.
We've got a lot of questions coming in the comments. We're going to get to those in just a minute, but first we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We are joined by Maui Mayor Richard Bissen, but we want to continue to encourage those of you who are watching both on air and online to enter your questions into our Facebook section of Hawaii News Now's Facebook page. And we have a few that have already come in.
Yeah, a lot of folks writing in, Mr. Mayor. And what's interesting is that there are some who are very supportive of your administration and your work, others not as much. But I thought this comment from Inez really sums it up. And she just says, it must be very heavy to be in his position. What has it been like to be a leader at this time?
Yeah, you know, the challenge has been to, as I said earlier, I think finding the resources that we need without really knowing exactly what all the resources are that we need. Because that is a fluid situation that changes all the time. First of all, thank you for that question, Inez, and for your empathy. I think that the others is the going out there. Some of this, the resources come to us, they just show up. People from other disasters come here. They says, you know what, you're going to want to know this, you're going to want to know that. So many moving parts, really. And again, just a dynamic situation that is constantly changing. You think you're heading down the right place and you got to shift to do the next thing. But on a personal level, I'll just say that whatever it is I'm experiencing is nothing compared to what all of our victims have had to experience. So, you know, I tend to compartmentalize whatever that part is. Every now and then it kind of comes out, I will say, but most of the time I'm able to put that in check and just try to keep the focus on getting our people to their homes, because that's really the ultimate goal. It's very straightforward. I won't call it simple because it's very complex. FEMA has already said, the administrator, this is the most complex disaster he's ever been involved in, and he's been doing this for maybe 30 years, 20 plus years. So, I mean, if it's complex for somebody who does it all the time, you know, for some simple Maui boy to have to step in and do some of this, it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of support. So it's a combination of factors that keep us going. So,
you know, you mentioned the support and people coming together, and I just wanted to get a quick update because one of the more notable figures, I should say, that really came forward was Oprah Winfrey and The Rock, who started the People's Fund of Maui.
Yeah.
What do you know about that fund right now? Because there seems to be some questions about what was happening there. Are you in conversations with them? What do you know about this fund in terms of how it's supporting residents? If you can give us an update on that.
So early on in the process, I was on a Zoom call with both of them, Jason Momoa, Shep Gordon, and actually it was in my office with Archie Kalepa, and Archie actually invited me to be part of that meeting. It was very productive. They, you know, this is the early days when they just put in their own money into the People's Fund, and they were gonna do their own fund, and I totally understood why. You know, one of the beliefs I think had to do with not wanting to have money go somewhere that would have a lot of administrative costs, and their whole plan, and this was mostly from Ms. Winfrey, was to have the money go directly to those impacted. And if you know her history, she's tended to do that, go to a particular family that she knows aggrieved and just give them money directly instead of go through a third party. And I think that's the biggest difference between their fund and some of the other funds that you see. They don't have to account for it, right? They don't have to answer to anybody as maybe a nonprofit like HCF does, or CNHA, or the county, and the federal government for that matter, all government. So it's a different strategy, a different method. They accumulated well over $20 million, I believe, that they've already given out. And you know, I've heard anecdotally from residents in Lahaina who have said, "Yep, I'm getting money from Oprah, and you know, I applied and I was accepted." So I know money is getting to people. I think they've been tended to be on the more quiet side. They're not trying to make a big splash. I know, like everyone involved in this, social media came after them, attaching all kinds of motives, which personally I thought was unfair and unjustified. Here you have people trying to do nice things, good things for strangers, and the way we thank them is by criticizing them when they didn't have to do any of this. So I have not been in touch with them since the early days because they don't need my help or my support, but they do. They are doing a good job from what I know, and so I don't have any reason to think otherwise.
I know we want to ask you about the police findings that came out recently, but before we get to that, I'm interested in the Attorney General's investigation. Sure. The Attorney General did issue a number of subpoenas to have folks from your administration be interviewed. Why was that necessary? Why not, bypass that part of the process?
We requested the subpoenas.
Right.
County did.
So why do that?
Because we wanted them to keep track of what was being given to them and what wasn't being given, instead of an informal request. Oh, can I get a copy of this? Our counsel and our attorneys wanted that to be documented, and we wanted to make sure that whatever was being requested was being, was in fact being accounted for. We've arranged for over 150 interviews with our personnel. That's all happened. In our estimation, I know I have some of the exact numbers, we have also given over 41,000 documents. And this is while we've been answering all the other investigations that have gone on, and especially the UEPA requests. We've had over 100 of those. We have 175 lawsuits going on. We haven't increased our staff or our county government. So all the people that they're asking are people that would normally be at their desks, at their jobs, in the field, police, fire. And so we have been turning over our documents to them, and I think we've cleared up a lot of the information that they've been requesting. And so I feel like there's a little bit of a what's the word I want to use? Maybe a misunderstanding. So we have given over 18,742 distinct files, including 7,746 video and audio files that total 46,105 pages, which is 118 gigabytes, which is, if I was younger, I would know what that means. And again, 150 technical interviews. This includes county personnel as well as retired personnel, people usually during the day, on their days that they're working. And again, 100 public records requests. We've cooperated with numerous investigations, the federal, the state, the county. And again, we've had over 100, I might have said 175, over 100 separate lawsuits as well that we're also responding to. So I wouldn't characterize it as us not cooperating. I think it's exactly the opposite. Some of it has been as simple as giving a PDF file, which is the format that we have it in, but they want it in a different format and having to reformat that. So for them, that counts as a we did not comply, when in fact we're saying we did. But I feel like we have gotten better since the 7th, 8th, and the 9th. I know they've assigned a particular deputy that is working with our council, and I was told just before I got here this morning that there's been improvement in an exchange of information. But I just wanted to say the word subpoena. These are not court subpoenas. These are subpoenas from their office that we requested so that we could keep track of exactly what we gave, because part of the discussion was we gave you that already, and you're saying we didn't. So now with a subpoena, we can more clearly identify. And by now we've bait stamped everything that we've given. We've given them an entire new set of all of that. We've asked them to refer to it by that so that we can say page 100 or page 200. Because again, a lot of it has been, well, you didn't give us this, you didn't give us that. And we're like, it's here or it's there. And this happens all the time, by the way, folks, in discovery. In cases, there's sometimes overlap, misunderstanding. With the volume I just explained to you, I think you could understand that there's opportunity where it might get mistaken.
And when you're talking about all this work that goes into this, and we look at also what the MPD report showed and what they were able to find in their own internal investigations and what they have made public, as you continue on in these conversations, at the end of the day, what have you gained, I guess, from the MPD report, and how do these other investigations you think are going to change or shape any sort of protocol moving forward within the county?
Yeah, I think the first thing we did was hire Daryl Oliveira. I think that was probably one of the biggest changes we made to what we were doing before the fires. The second thing we've done is we've brought on Amos Lono Kailua Hewitt, who Daryl was here for a contracted period of 90 days. And now we have a full-time person on board. I think leadership is really important in all of our branches, whether it's the fire department, the police department, MEMA. The after-action report you're referring to from the police department made 32 recommendations. Clearly, those are defined for law enforcement. The focus, the audience, you would say, might be other law enforcement agencies looking at how to learn from this. But certainly the county can take away a lot of that information. And in particular, I think it was either recommendation 13 or 14 that talks about improving our our dispatcher system. Now, I did want to say this. The Maui County Police Officers Dispatchers won the Call Center of the Year award from Washington, D.C., the National 911 organization there alerted the chief, I want to say last week sometime, that his dispatchers were presented that award. So the Dispatcher of the Year award, if you would, the national award. And it was well deserved. You know, they took in over 4,500 calls in one day, which is triple what they normally would take. People came in off duty, came in to help work in the dispatch call center to help, supplement. There were so many positive things that happened that were learned. So I think the after action report is going to be critical for how we not only respond, but implement. Most reports are recommendations, but it's nothing until you do implementation. And it's kind of that old saying, you don't give credit to the person who predicts the flood, you give credit to the person who builds the ark. And that's really what we got to do. Lots of good information, but we got to turn that into implementation.
You mentioned a number of lawsuits that the county is facing, and one of the things that the governor laid out on the anniversary, the 6-month anniversary, was this victims' compensation fund, folks entitled to $1.5 million if they agreed not to sue a number of different entities. What are your thoughts about why this is, a good way to kind of deal with this process?
I think it will be fitting for some people and not for others. So there's $150 million that started that fund and that was put in by different entities, as you mentioned, including the county. Some people will take a long time for their lawsuits to be resolved and may or may not get that amount, less, more, who knows. So I think for some people, they're survivors, their families may be interested in a resolution that they think is fair and timely. For some people, that $1.5 million will help them move on, rebuild, do other things. But definitely this won't be for all of the 101 folks that are involved in this, but their families will decide that, and it's an option. This is not unusual. This was the governor got this idea from the 9/11 settlement that occurred there, except that came along much later. So I guess the difference is this is earlier in the process. And knowing the world of lawsuits and courtrooms, I can understand why some people or their counsel might discourage that and say, I can do this for you, I can get that for you. I think this will be, again, a good fit for some people, and at least it's an option. You have, no obligation to take it, no obligation to get involved in it. You're welcome to take other courses of action. But at least it's something that you don't normally see offered at a stage like this. So I thought the governor was wise to put this out there.
I want to ask you about the overall state of the Maui economy as a whole. We're talking about, of course, all of the impact of the fire and these residents. But when you're looking at just your overall budget, having to maybe request more funds from the state and the legislature for assistance with the loss in tourism revenue, TAT and such. Where do you think in your conversations with those in your administration who are tracking some of these, not only taxes, but just overall income that's coming to the island itself and the county, how much has this impacted the overall budget moving forward? And what are some of the contingency plans to mitigate some of these concerns?
Well, the good news is that when Moody's came here to do our evaluation, they did not lower our rating. So our rating, they found us to still be viable, and I thought that was a positive sign. That was a surprise to some folks. I know the state had a really good rating as well. So I think that was one sign. I think what we're seeing is not a replacement of tourism, but maybe a supplementing of that by the cleanup. There's lots of federal money that's been infused into Maui. Money we wouldn't normally see. Money going to our citizens and staying in our community. So we get local contractors that are getting paid to do the cleanup on the ground. That's not funding that anybody had projected. Anybody who owns a hammer is gonna get a job on Maui. Because we have all this rebuilding, right? 3,000 structures, damaged or destroyed. So developers, contractors, they can't wait to get started on their projects. We're trying to, believe it or not, trying to push those through as well. But I think that what we didn't know we were going to get infused is going to help support what we know we're going to take a loss in. Again, not an exact, perhaps, replacement, but certainly not, well, okay, you're not getting any tourism, and you're not getting any building, and you're not getting any cleanup. So we know that there are monies that are coming into the county, and I would probably say the state, because of what's happened, that is a disaster response. It's not going to be enough for us to get what we need. So we need lots of help from the legislature. We've gone to the legislature. I think I have a team over there almost every week now, having to answer questions either through finance or Ways and Means, so that they know, Maui, what's your vision? What's your plan? What do you need? That number changes almost daily, because we find out more things. If our infrastructure is less than we thought, the damage is less than we thought, that's great. Speeds up our timeline. It recalculates what we think our loss is. So as far as the economy is concerned, there has been some return, obviously. I mean, we hear it mostly from the local community that maybe sometimes a little too many people in one location, perhaps. But I think we're also seeing, the contractor side of the equation.
You mentioned voting with your feet in reference to the Lahaina Unity Gathering and all the people who came together. There's another way that folks can vote with their feet, and that is to leave. Are you able to track how many residents that you could be losing either to other islands or perhaps to the continent, folks who say, I'm going to go live with my cousin in Vegas or wherever, because it's just too hard to stay here right now?
Yes. Matt Jahowski, who works for CNHA, and CNHA has the data sharing agreement with the federal government, and so everyone gives him their data, and so we get ours from them. They're able to give us aggregate numbers. They can't give us specific names or anything like that, of course. So we know that about 1,400 out of 5,400 families have temporarily relocated somewhere else.
These are families or people?
That's families.
1,400 families.
Families.
Okay.
Now, families can be 2 people, 8 people, but I would say to you that we don't know if that's permanent or temporary. We know they've relocated. They've gone somewhere other than Lahaina, but we don't know if they are coming back. Our goal is to get them back. Our goal is for everyone to be back at their homes on Maui. That's what we're doing this all for, is to get people back to their homes on Maui, including that 1,400. But we got that number from CNHA.
Beyond just the homes that need to be rebuilt, the community as a whole of Lahaina as well, there was another part of the island, Kula, that was also impacted. Some often maybe forget about this area that also saw some significant damage and some residents who suffered a lot. Can you give us an update about that community and what's going on there and the recovery efforts and maybe the similarities and differences that you're experiencing in this community?
Sure, that's a really great question too. So we continue to have our community meetings in Kula. That was every Tuesdays, and we were in Lahaina on Wednesdays. And I can tell you that many of the folks that came to the community meetings expressed how impressed they were with the cleanup done by, or the clearing done by the Army Corps of Engineers and their subcontractors that were working with them. They were surprisingly impressed. Initially, it was sort of our test case. They were the first ones to have the clearing done. And, there were neighbors living next to impacted areas that did not move out of their home, even while the clearing was going on. It was considered that safe. Now, there are lots of air monitors letting you know what's going on. And that air monitor would pick up everything from someone smoking a cigarette to somebody smoking meat down the road to a muffler of a car driving by. It was that sensitive. And I'm assured that people were safe, were healthy. And again, there were those who were initially, they weren't too sure. They were very suspect of this process. And after watching it, and most of these owners stood there and watched their properties be cleared so they could see for themselves. And when they came back to our community meetings, they spoke praises of the Army Corps. We finished ahead of schedule as well, despite weather that was happening. So I can't tell you that Kula is back to normal because it's far from that. People are at the stage now of trying to get their permits, trying to get their plans, trying to get rebuilt. There is some other debris that we're often reminded about in the gulches and in places that were not the mission of the Army Corps of Engineers. But there are other sources, federal funds, perhaps some state funds that have been sought and have been received to do those longer cleanups. But what I have tried to explain to our community and in different meetings is everything is important, but some things are urgent. And what was urgent was the clearing. The stuff that needs to be done, that's still important, and we'll get to that. But now what's urgent is to clear Lahaina. And we learned a lot from Kula that they're using in Lahaina. Sorry.
Let's talk a little bit about the mental well-being of the community. We know that this is a traumatic event for thousands of people felt as a collective, and that makes it a very unique circumstance. You know, you think about, most of us in life have experienced loss of some kind. There's the initial flurry, you plan a funeral, you deal with the loved ones' belongings, you kind of handle all of that, and it feels like that's kind of what you're going through right now as a community. Okay, get everybody into housing, but when things kind of settle down and you have a little space to reflect, there can be a lot of depression and grief and trauma. What are you doing to address the mental health of the community, knowing that you are dealing with thousands of people who have experienced this?
Yeah, almost every single person involved in this is traumatized, every single person. Whether you're a first responder or whether you're someone that works at a hotel or worked at a restaurant. What we are learning is that everybody's trauma is at their own pace. So you really, and I know we hear this all the time, but we have to meet people where they're at. Some people are much more outward about it, others. Our message to people is it's okay to not be okay. And, sometimes there can be a little stigma attached to people if they say, oh, I'm suffering this or that. So we know that there are programs that have come to the hotels. There are programs that are coming to us with the state's help from DHS. We have lots of programs that are planned for our youth. In fact, I had a list of them. I didn't want to miss those. But Kaiser is offering a teen counseling group for Groups for Borders. We have the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Now that team I thought was really amazing is that they've trained over 1,000 Maui employees in what's called psychological first aid. And a lot of the folks that I know that have gone through it, some of our team, these are to prepare the schools to offer planning and training on trauma-informed support. We have ongoing adult support. The county has programs for our county employees. You're allowed up to 9 therapy sessions as part of your being a worker. And 76 of our county workers lost their homes. So, we've had meetings with just that group of our employees, but there are lots of people that need that type of help. The Department of Health is offering long-term support for our staff. When each Lahaina school is open, there will be an adult therapist in each of those schools to help with whether it's our staff or with the child. And then, of course, the employee assistance program. So I didn't want to miss that list because it's such a longer list, but a lot of those are intended for youth. And, of course, some for our adults, folks that are experiencing that. But there's no question, mental health is our number one problem right now, before housing. Housing is causing the mental health or the lack of housing. It's the anxiety, it's the unknown that's going on that I think is impacting our community. But people are resilient, but people are also eager to help each other. So even if it's just having a conversation, a lot of the folks that are like situational, right? They're in the same situation, are also offering. But we've had some people. It's interesting. They've gone to the trainings so that they could refer someone else, and they find themselves benefiting from the training, and that is very common. That's been very common. One of the things that people criticize the Red Cross about at the hotels is, I got to check in every 48 hours or every 72 hours or whatever it's been. And we're told by Red Cross those are wellness checkups. Those are to make sure that that person is still doing okay. Now, I know it's a hassle, but some people who have come to realize what it is, they're just checking on me. Because we've had people just move out of the hotels. We've had people maybe self-harm in other situations. So the idea is to get to them before they can do something we don't want them to do. So there are all sorts of programs happening, some known, some unknown. So
Well, that unfortunately our time has come to an end. But before we let you go, one of the memorable moments that happened, of course, from the Super Bowl was the coin toss by the Lunas of Lahaina Luna and the coaches and the players. Just your thoughts to be able to see them on that stage and Maui highlighted in that way.
So we just had our 6-month vigil. We had all the spiritual leaders in Lahaina come together. And what I spoke at that gathering of about 300 people was Lahaina Luna did not make it to the state finals this year. They made it to the Super Bowl. So that's what it felt like.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate the update. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We'll be right back right after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Great to hear from Maui Mayor Richard Bissen there. A lot of updates to encourage any of you, if you missed any portion of this interview, to go back and watch the rebroadcast, because a number of significant announcements that were made, including his update on some of the progress being made on some of the lots being cleared. He said over 100 lots already cleared, and that he looks to increase the number of personnel that will be working. He's trying to get 25 to 30 crews a day working simultaneously to clear up some of this debris zone.
And some of the discussion about where that debris should go. Also talking about the need for housing and his concerns about that. But interesting at the end there, Ryan, to hear him say that he thinks the number one issue still is mental health.
Yeah, and of course, a number of bills that have been introduced to the state legislature that he and the rest of the administration continue to look through, including a potential advisory board that would fall under the 8 CDA. He said that the county is neither supporting or opposing it, but had some comments about the way that it's structured. So we'll have to take a look and continue to follow that as well.
Yeah, sounds like some reservations about that extra layer of oversight. Will it perhaps add more bureaucracy? We'll have to see how that plays out. We appreciate him being here. We appreciate all of you in the comments. Next week, we turn our focus to housing and homelessness with two leaders who are taking that on at the state and county levels.
Yeah, looking forward to speaking with Sam Moko as well as John Mizuno about some of our housing issues. Of course, both the governor and the Honolulu mayor have really said that this is a priority of them. And so we'll continue to get an update from them. We leave you this afternoon with a beautiful shot here of Anaiho Omalu Bay on the Big Island. Great to see that side of the island looking nice and clear. We'll see you right back here next week, Tuesday, for another Spotlight Hawaii.
Aloha.